Hello guys, got another video today. Today we'll be talking about the subject of recoil and spread or bloom, and the difference between controller and mouse and keyboard in Battlefield 6. Now, as a player who's quite familiar with both inputs, very familiar with sort of dialing and settings, have quite a lot of experience on both, we're going to take a look, see what's going on here, and sort of ultimately answer the question, does it really matter sort of in-game scenarios? Is it a question of, one input has less recoil? Is it balanced? Is it unfair? Let's get straight into it. So, over the past couple of days, have been testing out the recoil on controller and on mouse and keyboard on PC, getting some footage for this video. So my testing will be using two weapons. You've got a PW5 or the MP5, sort of commonly referred to as the MP5, and the LMG KTS 100, which is a very sort of popular choice for both inputs, particularly in RedSec, and sort of multiplayer as well. Now, I will be testing both weapons with two different builds. So one build is fully kitted out, max attachments, and the other build is with 0 attachments, no attachments, just a default setup with nothing in it. And with both builds, using this sort of overturned bus on Siege of Cairo, we'll have sort of close range shooting without control, another with control, so controlling the recoil the best that I can, and then the same again at a range that I would consider sort of like mid-range. So close range shooting, mid-range shooting, one with control, one without control across two different builds as well. And then sort of bonus round of mid-range with controlled bursting. And the reason why I'll get to that later. I will try and label each input to sort of like avoid confusion, so it makes it easier to exactly know which is which, what I'm using in this video and what footage I'm using. So it did take me quite a long time to get the footage and test this, so if you can sort of drop a sub, be very much appreciated. A like as well, be an absolute legend. Thank you very much. So let's get on with it. Right, so the first clip here is on mouse and keyboard using a max spec PW5 at close range, uncontrolled, and then controlled, and then again with mid-range with the same. And here's the recoil, and you can see there's quite a lot of difference here. You can see there's quite a lot of difference here. It's sort of like mid-range and sort of from close range, very spread out sort of recoil is what it is. And then I've done exactly the same on controller, and then so this is the mouse and keyboard, is the controller spray pan, and I've got like a side by side here so you can see it more clearly. And then I sort of zoom in. Let me just go to the zoom on the left. Right, so here, mouse and keyboard versus controller. This is a PW5 Max Attachments. The left is uncontrolled, just letting the recoil do its thing. And then the right side is me trying to hold that recoil. You could say the uncontrolled, say it's probably more confined. You could probably say that's less recoil. On the right side, with controlled recoil, I'd say not so much. They look quite similar, I would say. Moving on to the next one, this is a mid-range. So as you can see, the uncontrolled recoil, you can definitely see that there's sort of less recoil there, I would say. And the sort of controlled one, I'll let you form your own opinion. This image here is the same again, but this is the PW5 without any attachments, so 0 attachments at all. And that's a sort of difference. Let me just go through the zoomed aspect. So this is again, uncontrolled, controlled. I was quite surprised by how similar they were, really. And then we go to mid-range again. Again you can sort of see the uncontrolled recoil. If you look at the left, the mouse and keyboard, that's nearly hitting top of the bus. Uncontrolled, and then you've got uncontrolled and controller. You can definitely see the sort of less recoil difference there. Do you know what I mean? And then the second part, I'm not sure if you can see that. I'll try and brighten it up in sort of like post editing so you can sort of see it better. Actually see like the controlled mouse and keyboard with 0 attachments. It looks like actually sort of done a better job there than the controller sort of counterpart. It looks like there's a lot more recoil there. And my sort of theory why that is it is just generally easier to control recoil with mouse and keyboard than it is with controller. Personally, I did recheck this for the controller, and they're the same patterns over and over again. And I think the reason why this is because, and you can especially see it on the no attachments of PW5. It's just easier to control spread and recoil with mouse and keyboard, and that's the sort of conclusion that I've come to here with that. Especially at mid range, it's quite difficult to control recoil and spread with controller, sort of particularly in mid range, and that's the difference there. And I think that's even with the less recoil that controller has, So we're going to quickly move on to the ATS 100, a very sort of popular weapon, particularly in red sec by controller players, by mouse and keyboards, both inputs quite like this weapon. That's the reason why I picked it, to see what really is going on here. You can see I've got some controller footage here of me just getting the footage and testing it out. And I think just in sake of speed, same testing over both builds, both weapons, both inputs, the same testing over and over again. I don't think I'm going to show you that here. I'm just going to go straight to the recoil patterns, I think. As you can see, this is the controller. All 4 spread patterns: uncontrolled, controlled at close range, uncontrolled at mid range, and controlled at mid range. Just going to go straight into the comparison here. I did try and match it up the best I can, the sort of images for the recoil. You probably can't see it here in this image. If I sort of take it to the next image, you can really see here. So mouse and keyboard, controller, KTS, max attachments. On the left side is uncontrolled, so I'm just letting the recoil go. On the right side is controlled, and I'm really sort of controlling that. And that's without bursting. That's not bursting either. You can see, you could probably say, again, the uncontrolled, you can really see the sort of left, the sort of less recoil the controller has. If we use this sort of like hatch that's on the bus, on the roof of the bus, that's, it's obviously tipped over. If we can sort of use that as a reference point of size and depth, even sort of little sort of markings on the bus, you would say that's less recoil with controller. I would say, just from my perspective of controller and mouse and keyboard, both weapons, particularly on the KTS, just don't have any recoil at all. And when I was just sort of warming up on both inputs, there was just very little sort of recoil control, like pulling down on the mouse, pulling down on a stick is very little, very minimal, like if any at all. And a lot of it was just sort of spread control, it was just tap firing and bursting, and that's how you really sort of. So what I'm trying to say is there's no recoil on both inputs essentially, and it's all down to spread control. Moving on to the next one, this is sort of mid-range. This is why I mentioned bursting, because we're going to try that out later. You can see again, KTS Max Attachments. This is at mid-range, so this picture is mid-range. Again, uncontrolled recoil. You can see the sort of recoil difference there. If we look at the sort of right side of the spray patterns of both, I'd say that's, although you'd say the controller has sort of, there's less, it's a lot tighter in there. You would say it's a lot closer than you think. That's mid-range ability. I'd say either side, that is both. Both of them would be a kill, honestly. We go to the next picture. This is a KTS with no attachments, 0 attachments at all. Like I said, that's all 4 side by side. Like I said, I tried to match it up as best I could. Please excuse the black bars there, but when I zoom in, it'd be a lot more easier to see. You can just see it just has less recoil there. And then here we go. This is a mid-range KTS. So you've got uncontrolled versus controlled, and I'd say the controlled is quite close there, honestly. Without attachments, it's quite close. I'd say the recoil is very close there, in my opinion. Obviously, you could see the. And then I'd say slightly less recoil on controller. But again, sort of mid-range, it's quite similar. So before we sort of form conclusions, and I just want to show you this sort of bursting. Now, like I said, in my test previously, all the sort of mid-range stuff, you know, a lot of it was just sort of mag dumping and just trying to control the recoil, which I would say not very representative of sort of in-game scenarios. You know, typically, you know, you can say like MP5 KTS, you can sort of at mid-range, you can sort of, because they have no recoil and very little spread, I would say, you know, you can get away with sort of mag dumping a lot of the time, but at the same time, bursting your weapon at mid-range is probably more beneficial for both inputs, and I'd say that's more realistic, which is why I've tested it again. I've gone through everything and tested just purely mid-range ability, and you can see here just testing out, just getting the footage for the PW5. So this is all mid-range, this isn't close range, so I know the setup's slightly different, so ignore everything before. This is just purely mid-range and just trying to control the recoil, bursting in like 5 or 6 bullet sprays with a PW5 with max attachments. So both of these spray patterns are controlled. So forget what I said before of the left side being uncontrolled. These are both controlled. Just done it twice essentially. You can see, you know, the sort of recoil sort of wilded over to the left there with the mouse and keyboard. They're sort of quite consistent, I would say. I think I've done quite a good job there, sort of controlling a recoil on sort of both inputs. Next one is sort of no attachments, 0 attachments, MP5. You can actually see here that, and this is sort of the conclusion that I'm coming to, is you can actually see the mouse and keyboard here with 0 attachments, PW5. I would say that actually looks better. Mid-range, controlled burst, mouse and keyboard looks a lot better than controller. Yeah, I would say. I'd be happy to say that. Quickly move on to the KTS, max attachments. I mean, look at this. This weapon just has no recoil. Let's be honest, man. Let's be honest. This is max attachment KTS build, and I'd say, you know, again at mid range, you know, this is sort of conclusion that I'm forming. You know, the mouse and keyboard is, you know, got good sort of bursting there, good sort of recoil control. I'd say, you know, they're very similar, honestly. That sort of mid-range capabilities. KTS, no attachments. Again, mid-range. You would probably say you could actually the controller is actually poor recoil control there from myself there, because it sort of wilded it a bit. But you definitely see a sort of like a V shaped. If you sort of had a V and you sort of tipped it over a bit, more like a tornado. Actually, a tornado is very sort of more representative, but you can see there's just them 3 little dots on the left side of the controller. That's just poor recoil control. So, but you know, even then, you can probably tell the recoil there is probably slightly less, I would say. But even though, you know, and I would say every single spray pattern, really, that would probably be a kill. In truth, they would all be kills, honestly. So to wrap up and, you know, sort of come to a conclusion, I think it's very safe to say that controller in Battlefield 6, it does have less recoil, mouse and keyboard. But, you know, we kind of knew that anyway, and that's nothing new. You know, the point of this video, well, what I was trying to make here, you know, is to demonstrate exactly what is going on here, you know, at close range, at mid-range, with a maxed out weapon, controlled recoil. Like, does it really even matter? And I think I'm coming to the conclusion of, you know, although controller has less recoil, you know, we'll say, you know, you won't be running around in Battlefield 6 with weapons with no attachments on, you know, shooting with uncontrolled recoil sprays, where I think, you know, the recoil difference is more noticeable. You know, I think in game scenarios, with at this point in Battlefield 6, a lot of players are running out with maxed out weapons or at least a few attachments equipped. You know, there is a recoil, there is a difference in recoil, but it's not as much as you think. And sometimes it's pretty close, you know. Using controlling recoil and spread is hard to do, particularly at mid-range, like even with practice. You know, and as someone who plays with mouse and keyboard, controlling recoil, particular spread, it's way easier using a controller, which I think is the reason why their controller has less recoil in the game. Just to mention something I haven't looked at in this video is aim assist, and you know, the controller players have, you know, less recoil combined with aim assist. that I think that's a completely different story. Just, just talking about recoil here, but, but when it does concern aim assist, from my own experience of been using Controller over the past few weeks since launch, and, and in the past, using Controller, you still have to control the recoil and spread, even though aim assist helps you with sort of staying on target, the slowdown aspect. So coming to the question of, do I think less recoil is overtuned? I don't think it's too much. From my experience, what I've experienced, I don't believe it's as bad as people make it out to be. Hopefully I've demonstrated this, I've shown this, as a mouse and keyboard player, seeing the less recoil in tests on maxed out weapons, controlling recoil with mouse and keyboard, controlling recoil with controller at close range, at mid range, it's a lot closer than you think. You're more than welcome to think differently. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. Drop a like as well, be very much appreciated. It did take a long time to make this video, so thank you. Yeah, and I will see you boys in the next one.